Hi. Have a piece of chocolate. What is your name? Okay. 10 o'clock. So let me go to smart attendance, and your smart attendance number is 747-747. And so let me put that in the chatting, 747 is your smart attendance number. And okay, so let's continue on here. And I've sent out some emails to people as you received over the weekend, including an invitation for you to sign up for a debate. Hooray! So you might recall that, let me show you what the share file that I sent you. This is for European Politics Society. This is for here. Yes, there it is. So this is the debate page Google file that I share with you so that you can sign up, like you sign up for your midterm conferences with me. You can see a debate presentation is 15% of your grade, and you know, the midterm working on is 30%, and the final is 30%. And so I would like you to sign up for a debate, and this means that instead of dividing the class into two groups, pro and con, and people taking turns making their statements about their position on the debate topic, we will instead focus upon, when we have a student sign up for debate, a student making a presentation pro and a student making participating in the debate as con. And just so I don't forget to remind you that if you sign up for a debate and no other student signs up to be your opponent, then I, the professor, will be your opponent. So is that you, Yi Ju Young? No, that's somebody else. So Yi Ju Young has signed up for pro here. And if nobody signs up to be Yi Ju Young's opponent here, I will be the opponent here. And that's okay. That's okay. There's no problem. Those of you who've had me in other classes know that we vote on who won the debate. And I often lose because, of course, when you vote on the debate, we will use the cyber campus and I will set it to anonymous, so we can't know how you voted, but I often lose those debates when I am up against the students, because I'm going to ask you all to vote on who won the debate and to grade the debate. But of course, I give the final grade on the debate, and I tend to be pretty lenient on the, if you make a good effort, you're going to get a very good grade on the debate. The purpose of the debate, as I mentioned at the beginning of the semester, one of our aims in this class is to improve your already wonderful communication skills in English, and that includes not only writing in English, but also speaking in public in English. And of course, there's a very direct connection between speaking and writing. I mean, the way to prepare effectively to speak in public is to write. And I told you I give presentations either in the US or on Zoom, like I did this past weekend. And I have to present my work, my ideas. And typically the most ideal situation is when I present a paper that I'm working on, because I have been working on the paper that I'm writing, whatever topic the paper is, and I've been thinking about it and revising it and refining it and researching it, so that when it is time to present the paper, the information is so embedded in my brain that it's very easy to make a presentation. And because I've learned information so well that I don't need to look at a copy of my speech to give a speech. I might have a copy of the speech in my hand, or at least the main points I want to cover on a piece of paper to remind myself what I have to talk about. But typically, I don't even use that, because I know what I have to say, and typically you only have like a very limited period of time. And you find that when you have to make a presentation in front of a group of people, the time goes by really, really fast. And before you know it, your 15 or 20 or 40 minutes is done. And so, everybody, of course, has been writing a paragraph, pro or con, on the debate topic. And this time, we will have students be the pro and con participants in the debate. And if we have a situation where somebody who is pro is here, or somebody who is in the debate is here, and the other person is not here in the room because of social distancing requirements, that's okay. We'll do the debate with a hybrid format. And that's okay, because hybrid Zoom format, I think, is here forever and ever. It's not going away, and that's good. I mean, like I told you, I'm doing a lot more conference participation these days because everybody's so used to using Zoom, and of course, South Korea has a great Zoom internet connection, right? I mean, better than I had in the United States when I was home in December and January and February. There's the internet connection, the global internet connection in Korea is better than in the United States. So if somebody has to prepare in the debate or participate in the debate while being here and another person is away, we'll just use it. We'll use the hybrid format, and that's practice, because that's also going to be what we face in our professional lives. And so here's the motivational speech I want to give to encourage you to practice and prepare, because as I told my European politics class before today's meeting, that if you can present and make a presentation to a group of people effectively, you're going to have a big advantage. You're going to get promotions, because organizations typically have situations where information has to be presented to other students or other coworkers in an organization, and the organization will look for people who are effective in explaining the new policies or the new information or the new rules or the new requirements to their coworkers. And if you have a reputation as an effective speaker that people enjoy watching and listening to, you're going to be asked to do those jobs, and you are going to get promoted. If you are an effective communicator in public spaces, it's great. And I know, because, I mean, well, I shouldn't say to my surprise, but my sister, she works for the state of Ohio, you know, in the Ohio's Bureau to ensure workers to be protected in case they get hurt, that they get medical insurance for workers who are hurt while working on the job. And the Bureau of Workmen's Compensation, it's called. And it turns out my sister's a great communicator. She likes giving presentations to people. And so she's regularly asked to make these presentations, and she's getting all of these requests, offers of promotions. And she turns them down because she doesn't want to move, because typically, if you're really ambitious, you have to be willing to move somewhere, like from her home to Columbus, the capital of the state of Ohio, right, where the state government is located. That's another thing. If you're going to be really ambitious, you have to be mobile. And so the key to effective public speaking is preparation. And to make a presentation look easy, like it's easy for me to come up here and speak, it means I have to know the information so well that I really don't have to focus so much on on remembering what I have to say. And instead, I can focus more on presentation style, looking for questions or seeking responses from the audience, pointing to the beautiful PowerPoint presentations or other audiovisual aids that we use. So, and of course, you've already been preparing for the debates because you write your paragraph, your weekly paragraph on the debate topic. And you write your paragraph on the debate topic, and you therefore are already aware of the information in the debate that we will be covering. And let me show you the evaluation criteria that I'm going to ask you to use in evaluating debate. So if we go to evaluation rubric, so this is a file I found years ago on the internet from a Canadian high school. So it's this is high school level work in Canada, in Ontario. And it's the format for debate. And the format for this debate is called the Lincoln-Douglas format. And of course, since this is a American politics class, Abraham Lincoln was the 17th president of the United States during the Civil War. And he, before he became president, he ran for the office of senator. You know, each state has 2 senators. So he was running to be a senator from the state of Illinois back in 1858. And he had a debate with Stephen Douglas. And Stephen Douglas was his opponent in the election. And Abraham Lincoln lost, of course, in 1858, that office for Senate, that election for Senate. But then he won the presidency in 1860. And Lincoln and Douglas debated. Stephen Douglas also ran against Abraham Lincoln in 1860, but lost to Abraham Lincoln. But they debated in 1858 on the topic of slavery. And of course, by this point, pretty much most people expected there was going to be some war. So this is a very highly sensitive topic, slavery. That we're on the eve of what would become the Civil War, and Lincoln's election as president would trigger that war. And so this is called the Lincoln-Douglas format. And so in the Lincoln-Douglas format, again, was it really the Lincoln-Douglas format, the actual format that Lincoln and Douglas actually used in 1858? I don't know, but you can see this appeal to American identity and American nationalism, naming this format the Lincoln-Douglas format, because Abraham Lincoln, of course, is considered to be a political saint in American political discourse. And you as a student should get the practice that Abraham Lincoln showed us how to debate. You should learn how to debate, because that's what a good citizen should adopt. I know Canada is not part of the United States, but they're heavily influenced by American practices. So the debate structure in the Lincoln-Douglas format is that pro-affirmative will speak for 6 minutes first. So, and then con, or negative, con, it means con, will then speak for up to 6 minutes. And then pro rebuts con, responds to con for 4 minutes. And then con gets up and then rebuts and concludes for up to 7 minutes. And then pro has the last word in their rebuttal and conclusion for 3 minutes. So that means pro speaks 3 times and con speaks twice. And so you can say pro has an advantage because they speak first and last. But if con can convince you that the pro argument is wrong, that is not valid, then you can say maybe that balances out, because pro has to persuade you, con has to show you that pro's arguments are not sufficient to prove the point. And during the debate, you can ask questions. The audience on Zoom and in the classroom can ask questions during the debate. And so I'm going to ask the students to grade anonymously the debate, and I will ask them to consider the 4 following criteria in evaluating the performance of pro or con, or affirmative and negative. First, the opening statement. An excellent opening statement. I used to use this as a hard copy to give to people when everybody came to class, but since we have to use Cyber Campus, I made it a little bit simpler. But this, in terms of how to grade, I'd just probably ask you to give, an A+ or A or B+ or B, whatever, to the debate. But I would like you to consider the opening statement. An excellent opening statement is an effective and well-organized constructive speech, logical, coherent, and that's excellent. Good is that the person clearly expresses their ideas and attempts to link them or construct them together in a coherent argument, but not as effectively, obviously, as they could possibly, in your view. And then satisfactory, again, they make a decent opening statement. At least you understand what they're trying to say. Limited, they make some claims and they try to support them, but they don't really do a good job of providing any evidence. And then poor is, it's not really good at all. So almost never do students give these, right? Then the rebuttal, an effective rebuttal rebuts the previous speaker's points. So when pro is speaking and then con is speaking, each side should be taking notes on each other's presentation. And again, there's an element of what's called extemporaneous speaking here. Thinking without having full time to prepare. Pro says something, con says something. Pro then has to respond to con. Unless they talk to each other before the class, which sometimes students have done for reasons I don't really know why, you have to respond immediately to pro in the debate. And that obviously helps to prepare if you know the information in the reading for the week really well, because you can see down here, use of week's reading material. So when you're making your opening statement and your rebuttal and your conclusion, you're citing specific information from the reading for the week to support your claims and points, knowing that everybody else in the class has also read the week's readings and written a paragraph. So they've thought about the material. They've read about it, they've thought about it. And remember, the purpose of all communication is to persuade. It is to persuade. So you have to consider your audience. And your audience, of course, are other students who wrote 150-word paragraphs on the debate topic for the week. And so if you can persuade them that your points relate to this scholarly peer-reviewed information in the Sabato and O'Connor book or in the edited book that we're going to read later about the 2020 election, you're more likely to persuade them that you won. So the rebuttal effectively shows the weaknesses or flaws in the opponent's speech, and then concludes by reiterating those criticisms and summarizing them at the end. Of course, good tries to do that as well, but not as effectively as the excellent category. Satisfactory is, there's some effort to find some flaws in the opponent's speech, and there's some effort to connect them to make a coherent argument. Excellent, makes a coherent rebuttal. Like, just say your point is wrong, and because that's not what Sabato said. But if you can show how they're really wrong in terms of making a counter argument that shows that pro's position is not as likely or as viable or as plausible as certainly as pro is claiming. But you have another suggestion that clearly shows that the pro argument is off base, right? And then, of course, limited is, they don't really make a coherent argument. And then poor is you just can't understand what they're talking about. And then presentation style, right? The person who's debating, again, people want to enjoy watching a presenter or a debate, which means they want the speakers to talk to them. They want, you might argue that they also want audiovisual pictures, PowerPoint presentations. You can use YouTube and Naver video clips, whatever you want to use to persuade the audience that your argument and your presentation is the more valid one. And that means appealing to people's aesthetic sense, appealing to their emotions, right? That means, that's why, for example, if you're going to give a presentation, we always tell people you should dress nicely, because people want to they want to have a positive impression. The kind of impression that people have of you as the presenter will affect their reaction to your argument, your statements and rebuttals and conclusions. And that's just a fact, right? That's the world we live in. We might not like it, but again, we have to function in reality. And so again, the key here is practice. So like I said, and the key to practice is writing down your ideas into basically a paper and then presenting the paper, which is basically what I do. When I have to make a presentation on, when I was in school, on material in a book, I basically took detailed notes and rewrote the information in that chapter that I was assigned to read in my own words. Like I told you, I don't want more than 10% of any paragraph or midterm paper you submit to be more than 10% should be direct quotes, because you don't learn much if you just write out the same text. If you have to phrase it in your own mind, in your own words, you're going to learn it. So I would then rephrase the information in the book in my own words, and then I would even take notes on those notes. Again, rephrasing it in my own words, because that process is embedding the information in my brain. So then I take the notes with me, and then I go out and make the presentation, and I never look at the notes, because the notes, the information is already embedded in my head by making the notes. Except, you know, if I got to be reminded to include some point that I think is really important. Okay, and so and if you know the information so well, then you can focus on, you know, the dynamics of making a presentation in terms of walking around, talking to people, raising and lowering the volume of your voice. And because you know the information so well, you don't have to think about the information when you have to speak it. And then, so that's what we will do in terms of the debate. And then, and if nobody else signs up, in case I didn't say this, if nobody else signs up for debate, then I will be, as I think I did say this already, I will be the opponent of the student. And keep in mind, I often lose those debates, so. Okay, so please do that and sign up for a debate. And also, in case I didn't mention this again, you know, I want students to meet with me we're officially still in the midterm week, because the week ends tomorrow, because we started on Wednesday, March 2nd. So the university wants us to do something with the students, so that's what we're doing. We're meeting individually, as well as to make up for and meeting in the classroom to make up for my conference attendance and my hospital visit. So a few of you have signed up today, but if you haven't signed up, you know, tomorrow is the last day. So to do that. So okay, and. So back to the notes. Any questions? If no questions, then let's go back to the modern bureaucracy. And we've been talking about the bureaucracy a bit, because we've been talking about the development of a modern country. If you want to have a modern country, a developed country, you seem to have an effective state, an effective government. And in a highly developed economy of the 21st century, you're going to also have a highly developed state bureaucracy to regulate and provide the rule of law as an ideal in regulating the economy, so that the economy appears to function according to objective criteria, rather than serving the interests of any particular rich person that is able to bribe people to do what they want, right? We want to persuade people that the government is acting on behalf of the general common public good, right? And a bureaucracy to implement and give substance to those policies that are adopted through legislation by the US Congress is a critical step. But as we already intimated in discussing the ghost guns, right, and gun regulation, that's only the first step in making law and policy. So I posted this PowerPoint slide on the assignment, so you have access to it there. And so this is an important topic, and it's an important topic. Maybe it's too important. Maybe there's too much emphasis on creating an efficient, effective administrative state. But in terms of explaining economic and political development, but it is critically important. You can have efficient, effective states, like, for example, well, the person who really highlighted the role of the bureaucracy in a modern development is Max Weber. Again, this giant of the field of the social sciences. He was a sociologist, historian, jurist, political economist. He was the one that wrote the the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism that we talked about earlier, about the founding of America by Calvinists who rejected the state-sanctioned church in favor of local church self-government, and equating that Protestant rise of Protestant religious rejection of authority in relationship to the changing world and the accelerating economic development of the world, which causing people to use their old medieval belief systems to adapt them and refine them to produce the Protestant Reformation. And this belief that emerged among, yeah, you can see Talcott Parsons referenced there. He was the American who translated Max Weber's German works into English, so he gets a lot of credit for making Max Weber's work well known in the United States. So everybody knows about Max Weber. Everybody, if you go to political science graduate school, you're going to know all about Max Weber. And as we talked about earlier, how, you know, in the early modern era, people still believed in God, right? And they could see the world changing around them. So God must be sending a message that you should exploit opportunity. And if you are successful in exploiting and improving your condition, God will like you. That God likes you, you know, because God knows everything, right? God knows if you're going to heaven or hell, because God is God, right? So how can I find out if God likes me or not? Am I successful in this world? Do I make money? Do I improve my status and condition? And he claimed that that was critically important for explaining the rise of, a simultaneous process of the rise of Protestantism with the beginnings of capitalism, of modern capitalism. But that was just one of the many works that he wrote. And he also emphasized the development of the modern administrative state. And let's just go back and highlight, because this will always come to mind, that whenever you say bureaucracy in a modern administrative efficient state, people think Weber, the Weberian ideal. And so bureaucracy and the development of modern bureaucracy. I mean, remember, bureaucracies, they exist only up here. When we talk about Catholic University of Korea, right? There's the president, there's the provost, there's the deans, there's the professors, there's the students, and these all exist here, up here in our brains. And how do you develop a consensus or an agreement on institutions? And what are institutions? They are rules and roles, like roles in a play, roles that you have in a film, in a performance, rules and roles of behavior that emerge in our brains about what we should and should not do, that we have as a shared consensus or shared agreement, that we all agree that this thing called the Catholic University of Korea exists. And when the Catholic University of Korea says we may only meet half the class in the classroom during the week, we follow the rules. Because, and I enforce the rules from my point of view as professor, and you also abide by the rules according to your understanding as your position, your role as students. So bureaucracy is a set of complex hierarchical departments, agencies, commissions, and their staffs that exist to help a chief executive carry out his or her own duties. Bureaucracies may be private organizations of government or government. So yes, there it is, the executive branch and development of the federal bureaucracy. Hooray, I can make that bigger. So modern bureaucracies, according to Weber, are characterized by a chain of command in which authority flows from top to bottom. Hey, we take for granted pretty much that the people that represent the government, that they represent the will of South Korea, that we should obey them, and you don't have to bribe them to get what you want. You don't have to engage in corruption. You don't have to give money to somebody so that they do what you want. But in much of the world, they live in countries in which the rule of law does not apply, except on a piece of paper somewhere that, oh yeah, we have a constitution, rule of law, but it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't really mean much in terms of the day-to-day life of people, and can but of course, at the same time, those corrupt governments also control weapons and guns and money, so people want to control them for their own self, for their own benefit, and the benefit of their families and tribes and in-groups. And you know, this notion of an efficient, effective government that hires and fires people according to neutral criteria, that hires the most qualified person to be in the government rather than the brother or sister of my friend. You know, this all came up. I mean, I got to remember, I'm much older than you, right? Do you remember the Sewol ferry disaster when the ship sank and 300 people died, including like 200 children? That was an amazing disaster. Just showing the impact of corruption and inefficiency in the Korean Coast Guard, in the Korean ferry service. There were lots of rules, they weren't being followed. They're there, the rules, nobody's following them, they weren't being enforced. People were being hired to work in the Coast Guard or in the ferry service because they were the brother of somebody or their son of somebody, not because they're best qualified, but because, you know, I gotta help my friends, I have to help my family. And you see the consequence, something horrible. And so right after that Sewol disaster happened, which was like 8 years ago, I believe, the Catholic University of Korea announced a new policy. You know, this is a gift-giving culture, like I'm giving you chocolate. You have a piece of chocolate. And Korean students want to give me gifts too. And the policy came down from the university, and I assume from the Ministry of Education and Human Resources in Korea, that I am not allowed to spend more than 40 or 50,000 won on meals for my students, and my students may not spend more than 40 or 50,000 won on meals or gifts for me. And if we do, I have to report it. And that was a direct response to the horror of the Sewol disaster. That we have to get rid of the legacies or the remaining legacies of corruption, of nepotism, of people buying grades. And of course, it comes up more recently with Park Geun-hye's advisor's daughter. She was at AY University, and the professor was giving it because it's the daughter of Park Geun-hye's best advisor, you know. She was getting good grades. That has to stop, right? And that means creating an efficient, effective bureaucracy in which people believe that it's not persons that rule, it's supposedly this thing called the rule of law prevails, not the rule of individuals. The rule of law. How do you create that belief? How do you create that, if I'm a Marxist, that delusion? Right? Gramsci and Antonio Gramsci's theories tries to explain how do you brainwash people to believe that if you're poor, it's because it's your fault. And you should obey because the government represents the general will, not the rich and powerful, but the general will of the Korean people. Obey, obey. Don't go on strike. Don't demand more profits. Don't unionize. Obey. That's what I've been working on. So, bureaucracies, really important for, and we take them for granted if we come from developed countries. But I've been, you know, I was in Bulgaria, right? And I was in Bulgaria from 1994, so just 5 years after communism ended. And I remember talking to young Korean students, graduates from our university who tried to become business people, and you couldn't do anything unless you bribe somebody. You have to pay somebody to get something done. You have to pay the police. You have to pay the government bureaucrat. You have to pay. You have to pay the college professor. Because college professors, they are state employees. They're employees of the Bulgarian government in these state universities. So, with the terrible economic problems in Bulgaria, with high inflation, the money for Bulgarian professors became basically useless, worthless, because the inflation destroyed the money, the value of the money. So how were these Bulgarian professors trying to survive? They wouldn't take their classes seriously. They would say, okay, yeah, here, let's stop, blah, 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 I'm done, bye-bye. Oh, you want more work? You want more teaching? You can hire me as a tutor. You could buy college degrees in Bulgaria. For 10,000 euros, you could buy a bachelor's degree from a university. It's true in Russia as well, which is a big source of their problems. Their defective equipment that doesn't work well. Can you imagine somebody working as an engineer in an arms manufacturing plant who doesn't really have an engineering qualification, but they bought a degree from a university? So, modern bureaucracies, really important. They are characterized by a chain of command in which the authority flows from top to bottom, a division of labor whereby work is apportioned among specialized workers to increase productivity, clear lines of authority among workers and their superiors, a goal orientation that determines structure, authority, and rules, impersonality, another rule of law, right, whereby all employees are treated fairly based on merit and all clients are served equally without discrimination according to established rules. Productivity, whereby all work and actions are evaluated according to established rules. So there was not really a modern bureaucracy in the United States until the end of the 19th century. Previously, a bureaucracy from the founding of the United States until 1861, the outbreak of the war, was based upon a spoil system. A person is elected president, puts his friends and his allies in jobs, in the nice paying jobs of the government bureaucracy. And that includes also the post office. Today, the modern executive branch, this does not include the military. It has almost 2 million people working for it. And so you can see the presidency is the chief executive of the executive branch, and that's where most of these people work. The Congress does have a bureaucracy that they've been attempting to develop and build over the years, partly to counteract the presidency. So the General Accounting Office is the government Congress auditor and bureaucracy that attempts to provide administrative services and analyses and estimations for the Congress. But you can see the executive branch has by far got a much bigger civilian employment of bureaucrats, civil service employees working for it. The judicial branch, the courts, they have people that work for it, but of course they're pretty small. And then the Postal Service, which is explicitly mentioned in the US Constitution, the Postal Service. So it is an agency that has an explicit reference in the US Constitution. So the total employment is 715 thousand, or almost 3 million people. So this is supposed to be a professional, impersonal rule of law orientation, which means that you have to have evaluation criteria for evaluating the performance of people. You have to have clear and criteria for finding and hiring the right people, rather than just hiring my friend or my brother or my sister or my brother's son or whatever. And you have to have ways by which to evaluate performance of people. And it's really difficult to fire somebody. Once they get into the federal civil service, this job security is a strong element for appealing to people to pursue a job in the civil service, because you're not going to make as much money in the civil service as you make working in the private sector, potentially, if you want to get a job where you feel like I'm working for the well-being of my country, for the United States, and you know that you are protected in terms of doing your job, versus in the private sector, typically, particularly if you work in what's called white collar, right, professional services, you can be fired tomorrow and there's nothing you can do about it. You just accept that. And that's true at university levels as well, and academic levels as well. If you become an administrator in the private sector, you can be removed easily. Whereas in the civil service, you might not make as much money, but you do have security and you can build a career there. But you still have to have some way by which to evaluate people's performance. I mean, they're human beings too. And of course, people might break down, might not do what they have to do, might become corrupt. So this describes the process by which how you fire a federal bureaucrat. And removing federal employees for poor performance is very difficult and rare. In 97, for example, of the federal government's 2.17 million employees, only 3,550 were terminated for poor performance. Only 100 were demoted, and only 1,257 failed to get a pay raise based on their poor performance. So if you're a traditional American conservative citizen, you might view these statistics as evidence that this federal government is a big, corrupt parasite on American society, because in this Protestant ethic, in the spirit of capitalism, the big government is suspect. The big government was a product of the Yangban aristocrats, claiming that they know what's best for the country and they represent the will of God in their efforts to maintain the best interests of the country. And on that basis, that they cannot be challenged or undermined in their efforts to make sure that the society is ruled and governed according to God's will. And the early Protestants rejected the Yangban and rejected the religion that justified the Yangban, the aristocracy. And they rejected the big, powerful Yangban aristocratic dominated state in which these ruling families have a tradition of ruling families and claim to know better what's good for you than you know for yourself. And where is the truth to be found? According to Max Weber's Protestant ethic in the spirit of capitalism, are you successful in the private sector? So conservative, libertarian, Republican types in particular, they view these facts as evidence that this is basically corruption, that these people have become so big and so powerful because they cannot compete in the private sector. Success in the private sector is most highly valued in American political culture, most highly respected. So much so that Donald Trump became president, someone who'd never been elected to any office before. And what did he have to offer? He claimed he was one of the most successful American businessmen ever. That's what he claimed. That's what counts in the views of those people that love Donald Trump. Not a professional politician, and certainly not a professional bureaucrat. Okay, so they go through the process by which you do this, and it's really difficult to get rid of. Of course, now I'm talking about sensitive topics here for Americans, because there are many Americans who do recognize that there's a history of racism in the United States. America was founded using enslaved labor. It self-justified its use of enslaved labor by claiming that the African people come from a backward culture, and that European culture that enslaved them is superior to them. Also, that American society is bringing civilization to the backward, primitive Indian peoples living. So we're going to take their resources and we're going to serve God's will rather than let these primitive Indians continue to stand in the way of progress. So as those ideas came under challenge in the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, the US government began to adopt policies to try to correct and break and correct these systemic policies and assumptions and attitudes that continue to marginalize Black people and Indian people, with all of the consequences of that marginalization producing. Like, for example, I think I might have mentioned maybe in the American history class, on some American Indian reservations, like Pine Bluff, the biggest Indian reservation where Indian people have been put to live, the life expectancy of people there is about the same as it is in Somalia, because these people have tremendous rates of alcoholism, diabetes from obesity, abuse of alcohol and drugs. So why? Well, a traditional conservative American white person might say it's because they don't want to improve themselves. It's their fault. You don't have to live like that. You choose to live like that. But from somebody who supports social justice reforms, progressive reforms, not conservative policies, they might say these people have been structurally marginalized for 400 years of European colonialism, Africans and Indians. For 400 years, since the first white men came to North America and established a permanent colony in the beginning of the 17th century, there has been this exclusion, degradation of these non-white people. And the result is high rates of unemployment, high drug and alcohol abuse, low life expectancy, and you're seeing it again with the COVID-19 pandemic. Twice as many African Americans and Hispanics and Indian people have been casualties as a proportion of the population as white people, because they're poorer, they're less healthy already, they've got obesity problems, they live cramped together in cheap, low value housing, they don't have any money, they can't work from home, they have to take low paying, essential jobs, essential workers, taking care of old people in old age homes, or working at cleaning in hospitals, or working at McDonald's, seeing customers all day, all the time. So the government began to intervene through various policies to try to break the reproductive cycles of discrimination, so that if you're a poor black person with not much education, because you were not allowed to get a good education, or became very difficult to get a good education, still you're going to fall in love and you're going to make a baby, and that baby is going to grow up in that environment, and the process of reproducing this segregation and marginalization continues. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So how do you break that? Affirmative action. We must take action affirmatively to break the systematic cycles of marginalization and segregation and subordination that keep reproducing these problems, so that we can really, in terms of social and economic justice, integrate these traditionally despised and minorities that are non-white, that are not Europeans. And so there are various policies that you adopt to do that. And one of the ways you do that is you make sure that as you expand this federal bureaucracy with the new programs, beginning in the 1930s with the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt, and then when World War II, and then after World War II, during the Cold War against the Soviet Union, which is saying, look how those Americans treat their black people. Africans, Asians, Koreans, communism is the answer, not capitalism. Remember, the Japanese were capitalists. How did the Japanese treat you Koreans under their capitalist system? Pretty badly. Communism, communism, communism. And so the federal government, after World War II, expands to regulate and moderate the economy and to build a new infrastructure for a late 20th century society. And that includes hiring lots of people who, from these population backgrounds that are traditionally disadvantaged. So what am I getting at? Today, among many typically white Americans, there's this suspicion that the federal government is a place where African Americans and others go to get a job. And Donald Trump played with it. They don't come out and openly say that. But when Donald Trump refuses to sign a budget, that we talked about how the budget is approved by the US government in the last class, that there was this suspicion among Donald Trump's supporters that, yeah, we don't like the government anyway, because basically it's a way by which the government is trying to provide reparations, compensation for the legacy of slavery. And that the black people deserve special treatment by getting these jobs that it's difficult to ever fire them from if they perform poorly. And it's an insidious, bad suspicion. But after 4 years of Trump, I saw it. I saw it among my family. I saw it among people say certain things. When Trump refused to pass the budget, to sign the budget, there was no budget, and the US government shut down for 30 days. there is this suspicion that this federal government is engaging in what conservatives call social engineering. That they're trying to engineer and reform American society to create a new image of American society, an image in the minds of whom? In the minds of me, college professors, and civil servants, and academics, and social scientists who want to engineer and change American society to fit with their view of how American society should function, should be. So that we should have gay marriage. That should be right. Why? Because I think it should be right. Despite the fact that the moksha in the church says God does not want legal marriage between men and women, between men and women and women. That somehow the federal government represents science, and science is better than religion. That the federal government should address and lead to resolve the challenges of climate change for the well-being of the world as well as America. That the federal government should take the lead in making us all wear masks for the pandemic when it's really, according to this classical liberal view, people that work in the government or work in universities or work anywhere, they're like all other people. They want power. They want control for their own status and their own benefit. And of course, I have to convince you that I'm not trying to control you and make you into my slave of the federal government. I'm doing what is best for you. The way 500 years ago, the British king claimed, I am controlling you because I want to make sure you go to heaven when you die. I'm doing what's best for you. I know what's best for you. The federal government knows what's best for you. Don't listen to your moksha. Don't even listen to your parents who are conservative because they're outdated. Backward thinking. Be progressive. Support gay rights. Support gene-affirming therapy. Gender-affirming therapy. You want to use marijuana? Go ahead, use marijuana. It's no worse than alcohol. Make this mad? Make you angry? Makes Trump supporters very angry. So going back to the development of the modern state, war is such an important part in the development of the modern state all over the world, right? Including in the United States. The Civil War that established the Department of Agriculture. That's not mentioned in the Constitution of the United States, but it was created because we had to organize farm resources to feed the soldiers, right? The pension office to provide benefits to all of those wounded veterans whose arms and legs and faces were shot off during the war, and their spouses and families who no longer had a husband to provide for them because he was killed in the war. And patronage also, that's the word for giving office positions and jobs to your friends and allies, and making sure they stay your political supporters and friends and allies in the next election and other political struggles. Patronage, jobs, grants, or other special favors that are given as rewards to friends and political allies for their support. Yeah, that sounds bad, right? But at the same time, how can you make this vast federal government do what you want it to do when you are elected as Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Barack Obama? You've got to put your friends in the position of authority. So Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Donald Trump, they have to appoint 3,500 political appointees to positions throughout the federal government. And of course, they're going to appoint people who will implement their agenda, the agenda that they campaigned on, that Donald Trump campaigned on to win the election. So, yeah, of course, you're going to have at the very top levels of the system, people who are appointed not because they're necessarily the most skilled and the most qualified, but because they're the most enthusiastic. Donald Trump can trust them, or Barack Obama can trust them, because Barack Obama, Joe Biden, are only one person. For Joe Biden to carry out his agenda that he campaigned on to win in November 2020, he needs thousands of people who can basically act or understand what Biden wants, or think they understand what Joe Biden wants, or Barack Obama wanted, or what Donald Trump wanted. So, and they're going to support their friends and try to steer this vast bureaucracy that people like Donald Trump and conservative Republicans believe is fundamentally leftist. That this federal bureaucracy, not all of it, but most of it, consists of people that favor what? A big role for the federal government. And that means there are problems that need to be addressed. And they're going to believe that there are problems that need to be addressed, because if there are problems that they need to be addressed, the federal government becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And the people that work in the federal government get more money and positions and influence. Where you stand on an issue depends upon where you sit. Where's your office? So if I work in the Defense Department, and my paycheck and my job depends upon the military, guess what? I'm likely to believe that the world is filled with terrible threats to America. Oh my God. Of course we must have a big military, because me and millions of people like me, our jobs and our paychecks depend upon the government providing money for the military. So I will see a world that is self-serving. Oh yes, Islamists, war on terror, China, oh Russia, oh my God. And the bureaucracy grows and grows, hires more and more people, and those people vote in elections. Those people give contributions to political campaigns, and they become vast vested interests that pursue and promote particular understandings and views of the world, rather than neutral arbiters that just simply do whatever Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Jimmy Carter tell them to do. And then we haven't even talked about all of the millions of people that work for the companies and corporations that supply those federal bureaucracies, that build the tanks and build the missiles that the US Defense Department needs. They also are going to favor a world in which a big, strong military and big, strong military budget is necessary, because they supply these government agencies. The US government, last time I heard, every year the US government buys $500 billion worth of products from the US, from companies. Tanks, bullets, vaccines. That might be old, that information. But it used to be 500, before the pandemic, was about $500 billion a year. And that's just the federal government of the United States. We're not talking about the state governments, the local governments, just the federal government. Products and services. So the beginning of the modern civil servants began with the assassination of James Garfield, who was an Ohioan. So James Garfield was assassinated by someone who was mad that he didn't get a job that he thought he was promised when James Garfield won the election. So James Garfield was besieged by office seekers or people seeking patronage. He wished to reform the system. He was assassinated by a frustrated job seeker, and the reaction to Garfield's death and increasing criticism of the spoils system, you know, to the winner go the spoils, right? So you win the election, you and your supporters get the spoils, get the benefits, was the Civil Service Reform Act in 1883, also called the Pendleton Act. This was a reform measure that created the Civil Service Commission to administer a partial merit system for appointing and promoting people, evaluating and promoting people, and hiring people. The act classified the federal service by grades, So, you know, G2, G3, G4, G5, G6, G7, G8, G9, all the way up to, I think, G15 or 16 exists today, to which appointments were made based on the results of competitive examination. It made it illegal for federal political appointees to be required to contribute to a particular political party. So if you get a job as a civil servant, you're not supposed to give money to any politician campaign running for office, whether it be presidencies or, and in fact, I'm even asked, you know, when I was working for, in Ohio for a state community college, I was asked when I was giving money to a political campaign, was I using the money I was receiving from the state of Ohio as a teacher at this community college in Salina, Wright State Lake Campus in Ohio. This civil service system operated to 1978, and the new version is the merit system. So let's, we'll talk a bit about that later. So again, along with the development of a modern industrialized society and economy, we see the development of bureaucracies to provide regulation and creation of effective markets and resolving conflicts within the market system, within the legal system, to continue to develop the economy. So the growth of big business, price fixing, and other unfair business practices after the Civil War stimulated Congress to create the Interstate Commerce Commission. And yeah, the Civil War, result of the Civil War really promoted the US federal government's promotion, facilitated the promotion by the US federal government of creating a modern industrialized society. So after the Civil War was over, the American economy boomed in size to become the world economic power that it was during World War I. The biggest economy, bigger than the British economy, anybody's economy. And it was the first independent regulatory commission. I mean, it's not mentioned in the Constitution. It's an agency created by Congress that's generally concerned with a specific aspect of the economy. And so Theodore Roosevelt, he was the president during the Russo-Japanese War, when he negotiated a peace agreement between Japan and Russia that also saw the United States being given Japanese recognition over Philippines by Japan in return for the Americans acquiescing to Japan's demands to basically move on to Korea. And he created the Department of Commerce and Labor. Woodrow Wilson then separated those two departments, the Department of Commerce and the Department of Labor. And he encouraged Congress to create the Free Trade Commission. This is all happening during what's called the Progressive Era, from 1880 to 1920, when the US federal government is really intervening to correct the evils or the failures of the economy and local politicians to protect what were assumed to be the fundamental necessities or obligations or rights that were due people, like, for example, the right to be able to work in a safe environment, the right to, when you buy medicine to treat a disease, that it's real, not a scam or a poison. So the Woodrow Wilson, I mean, he's not Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, yeah, that's where the term teddy bear comes from, right? During his campaign, the teddy bear was developed. You know, you have teddy bears in Korea? You know what a teddy bear is? Yeah, okay, well, it's named after him. But he established the Food and Drug Administration, which its job is to regulate and evaluate and regulate new proposed drugs and maintain the quality of food, which there had not been any regulation previously. Also about the same time, modern medicine emerged in modern medical schools. You know, Catholic University of Korea is one of the top medical schools in Korea. I was reading a book at the start of the pandemic called The Great Influenza, which was published 18 years ago in revised editions, published in 2005 about the 1918 Spanish flu. And the book starts off talking about the development of the modern medical system, medical training, the development of professional qualifications for doctors, All this is happening at this time at the beginning of the 20th century. Franklin Roosevelt, a distant cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, created the New Deal and created hundreds of new government agencies to deal with the Great Depression, basically to declare war on the Great Depression. And Lyndon Johnson, he launched the War on Poverty, created additional growth in the bureaucracy, including in the taxation programs we just discussed earlier, the Medicare insurance program for old people, so that even if you're poor, you can still get medical treatment if you're old and poor. And also Medicaid, so that if you have no money, you can still get treatment, but you have to first prove you have no money before you can go on Medicaid. Medicaid and Medicare are the two programs. The Hatch Act, this is kind of interesting because this is from 2006. This came up during the Trump administration. The Hatch Act was a law enacted in 1939 to prohibit civil servants from taking activist roles in partisan campaigns. You could not make political contributions, work for a political party, or campaign for a particular candidate. The Trump administration people that worked in the Trump administration, they were charged with violating the Hatch Act repeatedly. And they were charged, but since he lost re-election, all of those legal actions taken against Trump officials in the Trump administration have pretty much faded away. It illustrated the difficulty of enforcing this. If the president doesn't want to enforce it, what are you going to do? The president is the chief executive. Under the president, the chief executive office is the Department of Justice, led by the Attorney General. If the Attorney General and the Department of Justice are not going to aggressively pursue enforcement of the Hatch Act, what is the Department of Justice supposed to do if the Attorney General is not supportive? You have those thousands of people who work as lawyers and attorneys in the Justice Department. They can try to take action, but they're going to face resistance at the top levels by the Trump political appointees. So this was a somewhat esoteric, unknown factor in American politics. But then when Trump was president, the media, the New York Times, was reporting lots of cases, repeated cases of Trump officials promoting certain, what were they doing? They were using their official functions to promote the Trump campaign for re-election. When they were acting as Secretary of State, for example. Secretary of State was Mike Pompeo. He'll probably run for president in 2024. He was using his position as Secretary of State to supposedly to support the Trump campaign for re-election in 2024 in his role and his actions as Secretary of State of U.S. government. The federal employees' political activity. Okay, so again, maybe I should mention, how are these problems supposed to be fixed? Congress has to fix them. But the Congress is not able to act because of the equal division between the Democrats and the Republicans in the Senate. And the Senate is likely to go to the Republicans in the election coming up in November. The Federal Employees Political Activities Act, it's a liberalization of the Hatch Act from 1983, allowed federal employees to run for office in nonpartisan campaigns and to contribute money to campaigns in partisan elections. So federal employees to run for office in nonpartisan elections. I'm not certain what that means, if insofar, for example, as it might mean that somebody who works for the federal government might want to run for local office, say, as a member of the school board. So there's all of these people that live in Washington, D.C. area that work for the federal government, right? And you know, the U.S. education system is locally controlled by local school boards. So somebody who works for the federal government might want to be on the school board to monitor the education system in their local schools. It's a nonpartisan position. You're not elected as a Democrat or Republican. They're allowed to do this under the Hatch Act. of this, I'm sorry, this reform of 1993. And so here is the list of what the federal bureaucrats may or may not do. Keep that in mind, right, that a lot of people that are taking this course in the United States and using the Sabato and O'Connor book, they have aspirations of working in the US government, maybe for the Justice Department or in some department or agency, maybe getting a job in the Foreign Service. So they're going to be particularly interested in this. So the modern bureaucracy, 1.8 million federal workers are not including postal and uniformed military personnel. Most are selected by merit standards. In other words, you have to pass an exam, a civil service or a foreign service exam, for example. These tests usually for entry-level positions. About 10% of the federal workforce are not covered by civil service protections. So these are the top positions appointed by the president and the top political levels of the agency. So they're appointed policymaking positions like cabinet secretaries, independent regulatory commissioners that are appointed by the president, and there are low-level non-policy patronage positions as well, like secretarial assistants to policymakers, for example. So keep that in mind. Personnel is policy. Who you appoint to be in charge of the Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, that monitors Wall Street. If you appoint somebody who has a long experience working in the federal government as an advocate for consumer rights against big banks, trying to use their power to squeeze as much fees and money out of millions of consumers who have credit cards, then that tells you that the administration is going to attempt to restrain or favor certain interest groups representing the demands of mobilized consumers versus the interest groups that represent banking industry. And keep in mind, Joe Biden doesn't breathe without thinking about its impact on the next elections. So all of this is oriented towards these appointment of people to these positions is high profile media coverage, trying to indicate to the core groups of people, I am serving you, you got me elected, now help me get reelected. Be enthusiastic, work for my reelection, and of course the Republicans are doing everything they can to make Biden look weak, ineffective, inefficient, and partly to discourage people to care about voting. Like, oh, it doesn't matter. You vote for Biden, you vote for Trump, and nothing changes. So I don't care. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to go out of it, make the effort to vote. And of course, those people that are motivated for their own economic interests, particularly not only, but those who are rich and powerful, they will have even more influence over policymaking. So there's a formal organization with the cabinet departments, major administrative units with responsibility for a broad area of government operations, like the Secretary of State, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security. Government corporations, these are businesses established by Congress that perform functions that could be provided by private businesses. Again, a lot of these were established in the 20th century, in the late 20th century. Like, we can't support a railway system by simple market outcomes in the United States because the trains don't make enough money. You need trains, but they're not going to survive as a result of economic incentives. So sometimes the government will intervene to regulate the behavior of those companies and create companies and regulate them to make sure that those services exist, including this FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, provides economic support for banks so banks can't go bankrupt like they did in the 1930s during the Great Depression. So if you go to the United States, you'll listen to the radio and you'll hear a bank commercial for your local bank that makes loans so you can buy a Jeep, or start a business or buy a car, and they'll say, First Commonwealth Bank, member FDIC. FDIC, which means don't worry, you don't have to worry about losing your money by the bank going bankrupt. And that did come up briefly during the 2008 financial crisis, because the insurance on deposits was set at old levels, years, decades previously, that were too low. So there was an emergency move under Barack Obama, and no, even before Barack Obama, by George W. Bush when he was leaving office, to raise the insurance level for deposits in banks because of what was at that time the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression, until the pandemic came. But we've recovered from the pandemic pretty quickly. The recovery from the financial crisis of 14 years ago was much, much slower. Independent agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency, these are government units that closely resemble a cabinet department, but have a narrow area of responsibility and are not part of any cabinet department. So like the director of Central Intelligence has a lot of power and influence, but he's not the Secretary of Intelligence. He's the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And finally, independent regulatory commissions like the Federal Reserve Board. I mean, that's really important, right? It's important for the whole world. That monitors and regulates the banking system in the United States. And the chairman of the Federal Reserve is Jerome Powell. And his job is to, along with the Federal Reserve Board, to regulate the economy. U.S. is divided into federal agency regions and city headquarters. So you can see Midwest, Northeast. New York gets its own, and New Jersey, they get their own, evidently because this is such an important part of the U.S. economy where Wall Street is located, New York City, right? And there you see the departments of the U.S. government. They haven't changed since the Department of Homeland Security was formed after the September 11, 2001 attacks. That's the most recent one. Department of Justice, led by the Attorney General, Department of the Treasury, Department of State, Department of the Interior. This controls a lot of land where oil and gas drilling occurs that the federal government controls, particularly in the western part of the United States. Like something like the majority of land in Arizona and Nevada is controlled by the federal government because they took it from Mexico in a war. Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Transportation. Pete Buttigieg, the openly gay candidate for president, the young guy who was a mayor of Indiana City with that Maltese last name. Smart, impressive, Afghanistan war veteran, openly gay, married to his husband, Chasten. He's now Secretary of the Department of Transportation, and he's pretty smart, and he's got the responsibility for overseeing much of the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that was passed by the Biden administration to overhaul the roads, airports, internet infrastructure of the United States. And I guess he's pretty smart. He's young too. Department of Housing, Urban Development. I can't remember who's in charge of that. Health and Human Services. Oh, Department of Interior, led by the first Indian American, indigenous, Deborah Holland. She's Indian, you know, so she has an English sounding name, but she's the first Indian American assigned to be the department secretary ever. Deborah Holland, and a female, of course. This controls most of the nuclear weapons. They're called the Department of Energy. They're separate from the Department of the Defense, but they are responsible for the nuclear research program, including maintenance of the U.S. nuclear research and military research facilities. So, of course, this agency and other these agencies, in dealing with the climate change, they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But of course, if you're a climate skeptic, like a vaccine skeptic, a pandemic skeptic, because you see a threat from the federal government, you don't want these government departments to get bigger and bigger and bigger, claiming, well, we need to save the world from climate change. We need new green technologies, new investment in new kinds of technology. We need to regulate the fossil fuel oil and gas industry more. And you can see the list of independent agencies and government corporations here. There are a lot of them, including this one. Oh, Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I didn't know that was a government corporation. I went there once for a conference. U.S. Institute of Peace, established 25 years ago to do research on how to bring about peace in conflicts around the world. I've used some of their books when I was teaching graduate courses here. They do some interesting work. You know, running out of time here. So implementation, right? There are 5 stages, more or less 5 stages to the policymaking process, right? There's formulation, adoption, legitimation, implementation, and evaluation of public policy in making public policy. Formulation, adoption, implementation, legitimation, implementation, and evaluation. So implementation is done by the bureaucracy, right? The process by which a law or policy is put into operation by the bureaucracy. Iron triangles. Still, with 1.8 million people, there's no way these bureaucracies have all of the knowledge and all the resources they need to implement their mandate, their requirement, their responsibilities. So who do they rely upon? Their partners. Their partners, the corporations they regulate. The trade unions that they work with. If you're in the Department of Labor and you're supposed to support the rights of workers, guess what? You're going to talk to a lot of unions and ask for union input. If you regulate fossil fuel industry in the Department of Interior, you're going to be talking a lot to oil and gas and coal companies because they're the ones that are engaged in that activity. And they also have the knowledge and the expertise that you need to do your job. So you don't want to make enemies of the people that you're working with, because if you make them enemies, you are going to face big obstacles to carry out any kind of effective efforts to do something significant. So you want to work with these interest groups. And keep in mind, interest groups are not necessarily bad things. Iron triangles refers to Congress people who want to get reelected, who have companies and corporations and different kinds of economic actors in their home districts where they represent who they represent in Congress. And the bureaucracies of the executive branch work with these interest groups and communicate with these interest groups to pursue their interests. And the interests of the federal government are to get reelected at the top level, but also these bureaucrats to demonstrate that they are doing something useful, and also these congressmen to get reelected. And the result is an iron triangle. It's a relatively stable relationship and patterns of interaction, institutionalization, in other words, that occur among an agency, interest groups, and congressional committees or subcommittees. Remember, I told you, if you're going to get into Congress, you have to choose an area of policy expertise. And it's going to be the area that your people back home are focused on. So if you're primarily representing farmers, you're going to get on the Agricultural Committee of the US Congress. If a lot of corporations build weapons for the military, you're going to be on the House Armed Services or Senate Armed Services Committee. Issue networks, that loose and informal relationships that exist among a large number of actors who work in broad policy area. It includes not only government officials, but also think tank members, professors, journalists who specialize. I mean, the New York Times hires particular journalists to cover particular beats or areas of expertise. And the increasing complexity of policy domains, interagency councils. So making policy. We talked about administrative discretion, about how these bureaucrats have to interpret laws that were often passed many years previously, even decades, many decades previously, to deal with ghost guns, for example, a problem that didn't exist 20 years ago, or even what, 10 years ago. Rulemaking, a quasi-legislative or administrative process that has the characteristics of a legislative act. And regulations, rules that govern the operation of a particular government program that have the force of law. And this is where these bureaucrats have their big impact in society by, through administrative discretion, in engaging in rulemaking to implement the will of the Congress, even if the will of the Congress was expressed 50, 60 years ago, to deal with current problems today. The 1946 Administrative Procedures Act. This tells you, this is supposed to be the procedure by which the government bureaucrats in any agency go about making specific rules, like we talked about those ghost guns, right? That there needs to be public notice of a time, place, and nature of rulemaking proceedings provided in the Federal Register. There needs to be submission of written arguments by anybody who's interested. And of course, with the internet, anybody can submit. That ghost gun regulation received 250,000 comments, and they all have to be read. The statutory purpose and basis of the rule has to be stated, and once the rule is written, 30 days must elapse before they take effect. And then, of course, somebody who's unhappy will probably try to sue that federal agency for violating, claiming that the new rule violates their constitutional rights, for example, to keep and bear arms, the Second Amendment. So this is how regulation is made. You summarizes those points. And I mean, again, this has become more and more of an issue as the pace of change, like American public health law. The laws on American public health were adopted long before the COVID-19 pandemic, and they were adopted without much understanding of the Spanish flu. Remember, the Spanish flu happened over 100 years ago. So science has developed, knowledge has developed since then. So to deal with the emergency of the pandemic, lots of government agencies were issuing rules and directives in response to this emergency. Like, for example, you have to wear a mask when you fly on a plane, when you go to an airport. And they justified that rule on the basis of some public law, public policy health law, that was adopted before anybody knew about coronaviruses. And of course, you might have heard a few days ago, a federal government judge appointed by Donald Trump and confirmed by the Senate in Florida said the Center for Disease Control, one of those agencies, cannot extend the mask rule 14 days because they didn't follow the Administrative Procedures Act. So the Biden administration has decided whether or not to appeal that rule to the next higher level, to the Federal Appeals Court, and it's only for 14 days. There's also administrative court system. An administrative judge also plays a role in evaluating. This is separate from the judicial system. This is within the agency that they have administrative judges that attempt to resolve disputes over an agency's administrative rules. Administrative adjudication, a quasi-judicial process in which a bureaucratic agency settles disputes between two parties in a manner similar to the way courts resolve disputes. But those judges, those administrative judges do not work for the Department of Justice. So it's like a separate judicial system. How do you keep these vast bureaucracies under democratic accountability? Because democracy is all about the government authority being accountable and answerable to the people. So how do you make people believe that these government agencies are under their control? Well, you elect presidents, and the president issues executive orders. Congressional control through constitutional powers laid out in the Constitution. The Congress has the power of the purse. In other words, the Congress authorizes the spending of money. If the Congress does not pass a budget, then the Defense Department doesn't buy anything. The General Accounting Office, the Congressional Research Service, and Congressional Budget Office are efforts to develop the Congress's own ability to surveil and monitor what the government is doing, separate from the president's executive branch. And that's in the last 50 years that those offices have been developed. And judicial control through the courts issuing their rulings. Okay, I have to move to my laptop, so I'm now going to close this class and open up my laptop. So stand by.